Oh boy, some major Nintendo Switch 2 news and leaks just dropped. Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and over the last 24 hours, so much news and leaks have come out, it's a lot. We have a lot to get into here. The Switch 2 motherboard has leaked, and so we will be diving into that conversation about the Switch 2 specs. But today's video will be going far beyond that, because also, we have some Donkey Kong Bananza leaks as well. Apparently, there's going to be a whole other mode to this game that is perhaps a bit surprising depending on how you look at it. But then even on top of that, we've gotten some new footage officially from Nintendo for Donkey Kong Bananza that shows off a new area and some other interesting little details. But then even going beyond that, Nintendo has put out their financial results explanatory material. We've gotten the results for their recent fiscal year that just ended on March 31st of 2025, and with it we've gotten some confirmations of release timing and some very interesting financial forecasts for how the Switch 2 is going to do. So there's a great deal to dive into today. But before doing so, let me point out that I am aiming to reach 50,000 subscribers by the time the Switch 2 launches on June 5th, so if you find yourself enjoying my content, your subscription would be appreciated. So apparently this YouTuber by the name of Geeker1 was able to purchase a Switch 2 motherboard, and they weren't sure if it was real or not, if it was a final version, but they looked it over and they cross-examined it from what we had seen leaked of the Switch 2 motherboard, and they were able to confirm that it is essentially the same motherboard that has gone out there. And so what has been interpreted after doing a deep dive analysis on what this is for the Switch 2 is this. It has an NVIDIA T239 with an 8 Cortex A78 cores and 4 MB of L3 cache. The manufacturing process is a Samsung 8nm. The GPU, an Ampere architecture, the same used by RTX 30 series cards, with 1,536 CUDA cores. The RAM is 12 GB of LPDDR5X with a 128-bit bandwidth and 8,533 megatransfers per second speed. The storage is 256 GB of ultra-fast storage 3.1, connectivity Wi-Fi and Bluetooth from MediaTek, a Realtek chip for the audio, and the power consumption can go up to 34.4 watts, but they assume Nintendo will likely reduce that. And so there's been a lot of interpretations of what these leaks are. A lot of people are upset that it's a Samsung 8nm process as opposed to a 5nm process. And something that's going on that I personally am not too much of a fan of is people are doing these estimates saying, oh, it's this powerful, it's like about as powerful as this laptop or what have you. People are estimating that it's certainly more powerful than a PlayStation 4 or a Steam Deck, but below a Series S. But what needs to be understood here is that this is a very custom thing. We do not know how it's ultimately going to be putting out games. Developers are going to learn this hardware and get better with it over time. And we also apparently don't even know what the clock speeds will be, which will likely vary because it's a hybrid console, as was the Switch with varying clock speeds. Now, I will point out that Nvidia, on their own site, told us, because Nvidia is behind the Switch 2 architecture, right? They told us that the graphics performance of the Switch 2 will be about 10 times of the Switch 1. Now, some people will opt to not believe Nvidia and assume they're lying or embellishing or exaggerating, but they're not saying raw power, they're saying graphics performance, so there's some room for interpretation there. And from what we've seen in the games, the Switch 2 is running games better than a PlayStation 4 or a Steam Deck, and in many cases, a Xbox Series S as well. We've seen games like Hogwarts Legacy, like Cyberpunk, like Final Fantasy VII Remake, Street Fighter. All of these games are running and looking pretty good, better than a lot of these other consoles. For Xbox Series S, it may kind of depend on the situation. So personally, I don't find this conversation too alarming, but everyone's freaking out about it. We are talking about it here, and I think it should simply be noted that while we do apparently have real leaks of the Switch 2, we still don't know the full picture, and we won't know until the console's out there and we're playing the games and we're testing it all out. But it at least seems like from the games we've seen and what developers have been saying is that the Switch 2 is pretty good hardware for what was expected. But let's now move on to this Donkey Kong Bananza situation. So apparently, on various Nintendo Store pages from Europe, as you see here, when you go on the Switch 2 filter for local multiplayer games, it includes Donkey Kong Bananza. I'm looking at different websites here, all from Europe, all saying Donkey Kong Bananza is a local multiplayer game on Nintendo Switch 2. So then, what does this mean? It probably means that Donkey Kong Bananza is going to have some form of local multiplayer. Now, my assumption of this local multiplayer is that it's going to be somewhat similar to how it worked in Super Mario Odyssey. We've already seen a lot of comparisons between Donkey Kong Bananza and Super Mario Odyssey. They share a lot of UI elements, a lot of core mechanics seem to be very similar. It seems likely that at least part of the Mario Odyssey team has been working on Donkey Kong Bananza, so certainly there are similar traits here, and this may also apply to a cooperative mode. In Mario Odyssey, a second player could control Cappy, so maybe in Donkey Kong Bananza, a second player in cooperative mode can control Oddrock, or like in Bowser's Fury, how you could control Bowser Jr. Or perhaps later on to the game in Donkey Kong Bonanza, you may be controlling another character, maybe a younger looking Pauline. But the other possibility that I'll throw out there is that maybe Donkey Kong Bonanza will have something like the multiplayer in Donkey Kong 64. Donkey Kong 64, you were able to play as different Kongs, and there was actually an arena-based competitive multiplayer where you could fight and challenge each other. Maybe they could be bringing in something like that in Donkey Kong Bonanza. Reminder, we still know very little about this game. They've only shown us 2 levels, and there appear to be many levels in this game. That all said, Nintendo did share with us some new footage on Donkey Kong Bonanza. So on the Nintendo Today app, they showed Donkey Kong exploring this desert region, fighting off these explosive crocoids, looks like here, or if they are still even crocoids, I'm not sure, but they do have the rock-like bodies and the little golden eyes, even though it looks more like a pig or something like that. But either way, we're in this desert area, and we do see some interesting things going on. I'll backtrack a little bit here. You may notice there's some sort of blue structure over there, not quite sure what it is yet. But it's nice to see another region that Donkey Kong is exploring. Notice how he's wearing pants though. And I think this is interesting because we know he loses his pants in the beginning of the game. This suggests that he will be able to get his pants again. We've seen store-like structures before. Seems likely that, like in Mario Odyssey, you will be able to buy different clothes and accessories, and you will be able to dress Donkey Kong. But there is something else we do see a little bit later into this footage here. Right here, we can see this chest. We've seen chests like this before with the horns and such. But as you may have just seen, there's also some sort of disc or CD that is dropped. So it looks like you might be able to collect musical tracks as well in this game. So I find that to be very interesting. There may be a great deal of different kinds of collectibles in this game. We just seem to be continually finding more and more. It's not just Banandium, it's not just Banandium chips, it's not just all these little gold things, it's not just the chests, it's not just the maps, it's also CDs and of varying kinds of fossils, and perhaps even more. This game looks to be huge. And yet, even with all that said, there is still more substantial news to discuss today. And we actually learned some very interesting things here that I don't think everyone is pointing out. So, taking a look at the explanatory material for Nintendo's financial results, there are some pretty cool things said here. So, scrolling down, we see here that they are forecasting that they will be selling 15 million Nintendo Switch 2s by the end of March 2026, 9 months after the launch of the Switch 2. They are forecasting 15 million units sold, which interestingly, according to Pierre485, would be the fastest selling system ever. Now, I have seen some different people talking about how this seems like a little bit of an underwhelming number. Like a lot of people are thinking, oh, maybe Switch 2 hits like 20 million before the holidays are over. And that just might be jumping the gun a little bit. For perspective, here we're looking at Switch 1 sales. It came out March 3rd, so by the end of the fiscal year, March 31st, 2017, right? It sold 2.74 million. So in the span of a few weeks, it sold 2.74 million worldwide. And here we are anticipating that Switch 2 is going to break all records and surpass even PS4 and PS5, which sold 4.5 in the span of a few weeks for its holiday season. When it came out, we think Switch 2 is going to beat that number, and also by extension would be beating the Switch 1's initial sales by a substantial margin as well. But if we look at its first year on the market, it took an entire year to sell 15 million. And with Switch 2, a more expensive console, in these more challenging economic times, with less time, Nintendo's anticipating that they will hit a similar number here. So I think that's actually a pretty big deal, and let's remind ourselves, this is a forecast. It may end up being the case that the Switch 2 could sell more. On the flip side, it could also end up selling less. So we will see what actually happens, but hopefully Nintendo is close to this forecast here. Now, something else worth noting, they are forecasting that Switch 1 is going to sell an additional 4.5 million units in this upcoming fiscal year. That is very interesting. It should be pointed out, Switch 1 currently sits at 152.12 million units. If they sell another 4.5, that would put us very close to 157, which would have it above the Nintendo DS's lifetime sales, which would put it as the best or second best selling video game console of all time. It would become the number one Nintendo console of all time in terms of sales, but in order to become the number one video game system period, it would have to pass PS2 at 160 million. But we should point out that PS2 was sold for many years even after PS3 came out. So as long as Nintendo continues to push Switch, and it has it on the market for a few more years, likely it's going to even pass PS2. If they sell 4.5 million Switch 1s, a year from now, if Nintendo's forecasting maybe another 2 or 3 million, at that point, the Switch will then meet up with PS2, and then if they just have it out there for a couple more years after that, surely Switch 1 will become the best-selling video game console of all time by a few million systems sold, which would be incredible, especially because the PS2 had an incredible, huge advantage that I don't think anyone is ever going to be able to replicate. The PS2 came out in the year 2000 when DVD systems were just coming out. It was actually considered to be a cheap DVD system, and oh, by the way, it plays games. So it had a huge advantage because of that. People were buying it just to watch movies. An advantage like that is probably never going to come again, or at least not for the foreseeable future. So the fact that the Switch is going to maybe surpass the PS2 lifetime in a couple years, that's absolutely incredible. But there's some more substantial news to look through throughout this explanatory material here. So, something that I think is worth pointing out here, they reiterate that Pokemon is a late 2025 release, but Metroid Prime 4, just a 2025 release. This strengthens my speculation that we will not have to wait that long to see Prime 4. Maybe it's not a summer release, but maybe it's fairly close. Maybe it comes out in September, and not so much October or November. We shall see, but that's what this seems to be suggesting here. Now, something else that I found very interesting. Actually, there's a few things. One, look at this. You'll notice they have Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bananza with the two big images for big first-party software for Switch 2, and then they have these three smaller things. Welcome Tour is also a launch title. It is a digital-only release, as is Dragon Drive. It's a digital-only release. It comes out later in the summer. Kirby Air Riders, I assume, is going to have its own physical release. We don't know much about it yet. But what I think looking at this image points out is that there is a need for some more substantial, big first-party Switch 2 exclusives, which I assume will be announced in the next Nintendo Direct, probably this June. Now, we got some Switch 2 Edition stuff here. That's not too big of a deal, but what is a big deal is this, because they give us some dates for some different games that we may already know about, a lot of launch titles here, but also, here they show Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, Winter 2025. So this is huge, because before, all we knew is that it was coming winter, not necessarily 2025. This is seemingly confirming that Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment is slated for a 2025 release. So that's a big deal. That is news that we did not know. It was not certain until apparently today. Now, taking a look at a few other little interesting things here, taking a look at the sales status of Nintendo Switch sell-in. As you see here, hardware sales continue to trend downwards, right, from last fiscal year to this fiscal year that just happened. And software sales, the same. They are trending downwards, which makes sense because we are at the end of the generation, for sure. I do find it interesting that Mario Kart 8 Deluxe continues to sell incredible numbers. This is just for the prior fiscal year. Jamboree, Mario Party is still a huge seller, for sure. Switch Sports is also staying strong. Echoes of Wisdom with a respectable 4.09 million. But there may be some confusion going on because 4.09 of sell-in, meaning this is what was sent to distributors, retailers. Sell-through apparently is just 3.7 million. So there's 400,000 copies of Echoes of Wisdom just kind of hanging around, although maybe over the last month or two, a few more people have picked up the game. And then looking here, we also see that Thousand Year Door has almost hit 2 million. Mario and Luigi Brothership, Luigi's Mansion 2 have both sold over 1.5 million. Donkey Kong Country Returns over 1 million. Those are decent sales for these games. They're all doing relatively well. It's nice to see. And yet we also see these other games here, Evergreen, still selling strong years after their initial releases. So that's impressive. A lot of Nintendo games are still selling pretty well. But anyways, we have a lot that has been going on as of late. It looks like Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment is coming out this year for sure. Donkey Kong Bananza apparently has some form of multiplayer. There's a lot more collectibles in this game, including some sort of musical discs. Switch 1 is pacing well to becoming the best-selling video game console of all time. Switch 2 is looking to have the strongest start for any video game system in history, at least according to Nintendo's forecasts. Switch 2 specs have been leaked, and really there's just so much going on. I am very curious what we'll learn about tomorrow. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.